Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All that. What I do want to start with is the continuing narrative and storyline that, frankly, is sucking all the oxygen out of the college basketball conversation on a national scale right now. And it's the continued downfall of the Kentucky Wildcats. And obviously, look, Kentucky's the biggest probably brand in college basketball. You know, they're in the short conversation. And we've talked about them a lot over the last couple of years. And I don't plan to discuss them every single night, every single episode when we talk college hoops. But it's hard not to, as this program continues to hit low after low after low, missing the NCAA tournament in 2021 during that weird COVID bubble year. 2022, last year, you lose to St. Peter's. But I would say Tuesday night at home against Rupp Arena felt like rock bottom, okay? They lose at home on Tuesday night to a South Carolina team that I would argue coming into the night was the worst team in the SEC, 7-8 overall, coming off of a 43-point loss to Tennessee on Saturday. And so throughout the Kentucky season, I've tried to kind of explain and rationalize and talk through some of these low points. Wasn't worried about Michigan State. Was disappointed in the effort against Gonzaga. Alabama, really good team last weekend. Missouri, first SEC road game, who knows, crazy environment, whatever. Well, what I would say is this. There is simply no excuse for what happened Tuesday night at home at Rupp Arena. You lose to what I would argue coming in we thought was the worst team in the SEC. I don't know that you can even say that anymore. Kentucky might actually be worse. And you do it in a game where your team has no heart, no fight. You fall down 13-2, and I know Cason Wallace got hurt. Well, Cason Wallace wasn't hurt when you fell down 13-2. And so what I would say, and the segment that I want to do now is this. I'm not going to break down the game. We've talked about Kentucky enough. But what I would say is this, if you had asked me a year ago, if you had asked me after the NCAA tournament last year, if you had asked me a week ago, I would say that there is no scenario where John Calipari is not the Kentucky basketball coach to open next season, 2023-2024. But in the last week, with the way things are going, embarrassed at Alabama, and then this loss to South Carolina, which does feel like rock bottom, what I would say is I don't think it's a 0% proposition anymore that John Calipari isn't coaching at Kentucky next year. Now, I still think it's likely. If I had to bet my life savings in Vegas on such a prop, I would still expect him to lead Kentucky out of the tunnel in 2023-2024. But I think even a week ago, I would have said it's 0% anybody else is coaching Kentucky next year. I don't think that we can say that anymore because we know, as I discussed on the show on Monday and Travis Branham confirmed, John Calipari is going to listen if Texas calls. I believe, and I have been told by people that know John Calipari is going to listen if an NBA team calls. Now, I don't think any of those teams are going to call, not with the way they're playing, but the point I'm trying to make, is there some scenario where John Calipari is not coaching Kentucky next year? I think there is. Maybe Texas calls. Maybe the NBA calls. Maybe they convince him to step into retirement or take the early retire. I don't know. But because it's not 0% anymore, I think we at least have to have the conversation of who would Kentucky call if this job conceivably opens sometime around the end of the season. And so what I want to do now, I put together a list of names like everybody does in a situation like this, and I want to talk out all the candidates. Again, if I had to bet, I think John Calipari is the head coach of Kentucky in 2023-2024. I don't know who else is going to hire him. He's not leaving. You're not firing him with the buyout in the tens of millions of dollars. But I don't think it's inconceivable that some way, somehow, he isn't your head coach next year. So let's go through the candidates, and I want to start with some big ones that frankly probably would say no. But the first name, if I was Mitch Barnhart, if I was the AD of Kentucky, and we find out that John Calipari is not coming back, he's going to Texas, he's going to the NBA, he decides to take an early retirement. Not saying it's going to happen. John Calipari is going to get all his money. The first call I would make is to former Villanova head coach Jay Wright. And so, again, don't think Cal's leaving. And I don't think Jay Wright is saying yes. I don't think Jay Wright is taking the job. But when I think about Jay Wright, this is what stands out to me about Jay Wright as I think about the next 10 years of his life. And yes, I spent part of Tuesday thinking about Jay Wright's future in the next 10 years of Jay Wright's life, okay? I think it was actually Wednesday, but neither here nor there. The point I'm trying to make is this, is that when I look at Jay Wright, I think there's one important thing that we have to remember about Jay Wright when he stepped aside at Villanova last year. Jay Wright, even in his closing press conference, said, I am retiring as the basketball coach at Villanova. He did not say I'm retiring as a basketball coach. He did not say I'm retiring from basketball. He said I'm retiring as the basketball coach from Villanova. And I think this is an important part. He said, I am burned out right now. And he even said he would reevaluate things. He's kind of in an ambassador role for the university. And he said, I can't tell you what it's going to be like a year from now. And so I believe that at some point, Jay Wright is going to coach again. And I actually believe the circumstances in which he left Villanova were totally unique. And I think we haven't talked about them enough. Now, if you listen to this show, you're smart and you know that I talk about this all the time. But when it comes to Jay Wright, what you need to remember, it wasn't just that he was tired of college basketball. It wasn't just that it was about NIL or the transfer portal or this or that. What Jay Wright was literally burned out. Here were the last 2 years of Jay Wright's life at 59, 60, 61 years old before he announced his retirement as Villanova's basketball coach. Remember, 2020, 2021 was the most stressful college basketball season for anyone in the history of college basketball and the history of sports. You're testing basically every day. You don't know who's going to be available for practice. You don't know if you're going to be available for practice. Your assistants, you're doing meetings via Zoom. You can't be in the gym every single, it was just so abnormal. But remember this about Jay Wright. Not only did he do that, then he immediately went to coach on Team USA as an assistant coach with Team USA in the 2021 Olympics, which had been pushed back from a year, and they were in Tokyo. Jay Wright talked about it on this podcast. He was a guest on this podcast. It was a bubble environment. He went straight from Villanova in a bubble to Team USA in a bubble, where they went to Japan, they quarantined, stayed in their hotel, could really only get together for practices and games, and then he came back home and then coached another season after that. So you're basically talking about 2 full years where Jay Wright came straight out of COVID and coached nothing but basketball, the travel, the rigors, the this, the that. And so that's why I don't believe he's retired. Roy Williams is retired. Coach K is retired. I don't believe that Jay Wright is retired. Now, I believe if he gets back and when he comes back, it's almost certainly going to be in the NBA. But if I was Mitch Barnhart, I would give him a call and offer that Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley money that's going to be really hard to turn down. Now, maybe he turns it down. He made a lot of money. He's 60 plus years old. His kids are out of the house, whatever. But what I would do, and I'm going to use, if you're driving in the car with your kids, turn it down for about half a second because I'm going to use some language here. Mitch Barnhart, if you want to go after Jay Wright, what I would say is this. This is my piece of advice, Mitch Barnhart. If you're going to go after Jay Wright or any of these really big candidates, you got to have some BDE. You know what BDE is? Need some big dick energy. In other words, excuse my language. In other words, you ain't going to Jay Wright with a 6-year, $30 million contract. 6-year, $35 million. You have to come to him with that Lincoln Riley, Brian Kelly, you can't say no money. If I'm Mitch Barnhart, I'm calling my boosters and I'm just starting to get a feel for, hey, we're going to make a move and we need you on support. I would start with a baseline, minimum, 8 years, $80 million contract. Not great at math, but that's $10 million a year. You'd be the highest paid coach. Come to Kentucky, save this program. We're going to give you 8 full years guaranteed. Retire. You're going to have a statue built in Philly. Have one built here. I don't know that he says yes, but again, if you're even going to back channel with Jay Wright, you can't goof off. This isn't a joke. This is, you get one shot and at the very least put an offer on his desk that makes him take a deep breath, grab his wife, and open a bottle of wine to really think this one through, okay? It's almost like, the Rick George. Rick George is the Colorado AD. Remember when they asked him how he was going to afford Deion Sanders' contract? He goes, I don't know. We don't have the money right now, but we'll figure it out. Well, that's what you do with Jay Wright. If you can get Jay Wright on the phone, you offer him so much money. It doesn't matter if you have it right now. You'll figure it out. But that to me is the answer on my candidate number one. My candidate number two is very similar. It's Brad Stevens, of course, the president of basketball operations with the Boston Celtics, who prior was the Celtics head coach, was the Butler head coach. And to be clear, we talked about that BDE a minute ago. You know what it is. Apparently, Indiana offered him a lot of money when Indiana had a contract opening. Obviously, that was when they hired Mike Woodson. So he has already turned down a lot of money, but a couple things have changed in Brad Stevens' life. One, he stepped away from coaching, and maybe he's totally content to be a front office guy, not to be in practices, not to be traveling, not to be doing this, not to be doing that. But one, he's traveling because I see him at college games all the time scouting. But two, if I was Mitch Barnhart, what I would do is sit him down and say this: do you want to be some suit up in the front office for the rest of your life? You belong with a whistle around your neck. You belong coaching college basketball. Couple other interesting things on Brad Stevens. And obviously, I don't need to go through his resume. It speaks for itself. But I was thinking about a couple interesting things with Brad Stevens. First off, he's 46 years old, okay? And to me, that matters for this reason. He's got kids who are teenagers. And in some ways, it'd probably be harder to get him to leave. But in other ways, he doesn't have that FU. He has really, really, really good money, okay? So I looked up his contract. When he left the Boston Celtics, he was making $3.6 million a year. That's a lot of money for you. That's certainly a lot of money for me. I can't speak for all of you, but for me, you pay me $3.6 million, I'm very content. But that isn't life-changing. That isn't setting up my kids and my grandkids kind of money. And so, first off, his contract expires not after this season or next season, but the following year. But he doesn't have a 10-year guaranteed contract. And so, again, I would appeal to the father in him, the husband in him, and say, you come here. We're going to make sure that whether you win one game, you lose one game, you win one national championship, you never win one, that your kids never have to worry about money again. Because $22 million is a lot, but $100 million guaranteed over X number of years, and you can go more years, more whatever with Brad Stevens because he's only 46. More years, more money. Your kids never have to worry about money again. Your grandkids never have to worry about money again. That's how I would appeal to Brad Stevens. He'd be my number two candidate. Now, in terms of the college ranks, there's a couple others that stand out, and we'll get back to one NBA guy that I know you guys and girls want me to talk about in a minute. But from the college ranks, a couple names stand out, and they're very similar to the ones that we've talked about with Texas. My first call in the college ranks would be to Nate Oates. Nate Oates is young. He's 49 years old. I continue to be blown away by what he does with that program at Alabama. And there's a positive and a negative that comes with Nate Oates. Again, another guy, I'm not going through his entire resume because we know what it is at this point. On a positive, on negative Nate Oates, negative Nate Oates. Let's start with the negative since I just said negative. The negative with Nate Oates is what I talked about with Texas. Unless I'm misreading his contract, he has a $9 million buyout, which means that you're going to have to pay $9 million to get him, just to talk to him, just to get him on campus. And then you got to pay him probably that $8-9 million a year to actually get him to listen to the job. Obviously, Alabama can match dollar for dollar, all that. But what stands out to me about Nate Oates and what I think is interesting, and listen, I've had Nate Oates on this podcast, but I clearly have never asked him about other jobs. But Nate Oates earlier this week had an interesting comment. Nate Oates was asked about a new basketball arena at Alabama. Now, I've never been to Tuscaloosa or certainly not ever been to Coleman Coliseum, but my understanding is it's old, it's outdated. And Nate Oates said something to the effect of, if we want to keep building this program, we need a new arena on this campus, frankly, very similar to what Texas has right now. And to me, that's probably what Texas is selling. But then beyond that, from the Kentucky perspective, that's where you got to come in and say, Alabama, we know, Alabama fans know, right? And I'm going to say two words that are going to drive people nuts. Football school. John Calipari said it this summer, and he's exactly right. Listen, Coach Oates, you went to Alabama, you were in Nick Saban's shadow, whatever. And by the way, Saban's the greatest to ever do it. Okay, cool. Kirby Smart's coming for that title as we just discussed. But I only bring it up to say, why don't you come be our Nick Saban? Why don't you come be our guy that we build a statue for? Now, they may build a statue for you, but it's never going to be bigger than Nick Saban's. And as we know, size matters, at least in statue. I can't speak for anything else, but in statues, the size matters. Come here. We're going to put a statue of you and Rupp and this and that. And Calipari, too. Cal probably is going to get a statue before it's all said and done. National title, whatever. So Nate Oates is my first call of the current college guys. Listen, Eric Musselman, the resume speaks for itself. And the thing about Eric Musselman, and we've talked about this with Texas, unless I am misunderstanding his contract, he has a $2 million buyout right now. And I'm sorry. I don't pick sides. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Hunter Yurachek, what are you doing? Hunter Yurachek is the Arkansas AD. Get on the phone with whoever does Coach Muss's contracts. You can't have Eric Musselman with a $2 million buyout in 2023 when we know Texas is open. We know money is of no issue to Texas, and where there's at least a faint possibility that Kentucky will open. Again, I don't think Kentucky's going to open, but you have to be ready. You cannot wait. And so Musselman speaks for himself. Back-to-back Elite Eights. I think the one thing about Musselman, he's the one guy, the thing that made the early part of the John Calipari era so special was that John Calipari came in right away and said, I'm bringing the number one recruiting class with me, and it flipped overnight. Well, Eric Musselman, he's a quick fix guy. He ain't waiting for year 3 to figure it out. He obviously has worked the portal as well as anybody. I think he'd be really interested again. And by the way, Arkansas fans tell me he's never leaving, blah, blah, blah. I think Arkansas does a great job. I think if Kentucky calls you, listen, at the very least, to get yourself a raise. But Hunter Yurachek, don't wait. Don't play Russian roulette. Get this done. A couple other candidates before we get out of here. Scott Drew is one we talked about with Texas. I don't know that I believe that Scott Drew is going to retire at Baylor. He's a great coach. Baylor's a great school. But they don't have the support of a school like Kentucky. I said it the other day. I turned in a Baylor game against TCU. Top 20 matchup at the time. Now, Baylor's struggling a little bit, which may hurt Scott Drew's candidacy in a hypothetical like this. And the place was like 40% full, 60% full for a Baylor TCU top 20 matchup in-state rivalry. And so to me, that's never going to be if you're a coach and you've brought a school a national title and you still can't fill up the arena for conference games against top 20 opponents, especially ones in state, I'd be kind of pissed. Now, the negative on Scott Drew is that because he works at a private school, we have no idea what his contract status is. And because of it, it makes it hard to really gauge what's realistic and what's not. He could have a $25 million buyout for all we know, and he might not be available. But again, this is why you work back channels. This is why you figure these details out. Speaking of massive buyouts, again, this one is available publicly. Mick Cronin, UCLA, has a $20+ million buyout, so we could probably say no to him. I saw somebody kind of privately suggested Rick Pitino to me. Listen, one, I'm working on Rick Pitino to St. John's. Okay, I am the face of Rick Pitino to St. John's. That's one. But two, I will say for Kentucky, one, there's the history on the Louisville side too. But I would say this about Pitino is, he's 70. Like I think St. John's has to try and get Pitino. I think other schools have to try and get Pitino. I thought Boston College should have gone after him a few years. I thought UNLV should have gone after him. I think Kentucky can get someone younger. I don't think you have to be desperate for Rick Pitino. I think it would be desperation, going after him. And then the last guy that I would say really quick, well, two guys, Chris Holtman from Ohio State speaks for himself. He's from Kentucky, built a really nice program at Ohio State. Again, do you want to be at a basketball school? I know John Calipari got yelled at for calling it a basketball school, but it is a basketball school. And then the last one, I don't know what to think about this one. This is one I have absolutely no sourcing on. I don't know what Billy Donovan's deal is. It's year 3 with the ball. For people who don't know, by the way, Billy Donovan was an assistant under Rick Pitino at Kentucky. For years, he has been linked to that job. I actually, and I did report this in my book, so I forget all of the details now. I should pull up my book, One and Fun. I believe the job was offered to him before Calipari in 2009, and he turned it down. But look, the guy is still, believe it or not, in his 50s, which is kind of blows my mind. He's been around forever, but he's still 57, probably got 7, 8, 9 good years left. And he's in year 3 with the Chicago Bulls. They're probably going to miss the playoffs. Now, right now, they're right on the cusp, 10 seed, playing game, whatever. It's a disaster. It's not going to work. We know how the NBA works. They might give him another year, but they're not in position to be dramatically improved. And in the NBA, if you don't have a Giannis, if you don't have a Luka Doncic, if you don't have a Kevin Durant, you're not winning at a high level. I think he could see the writing on the wall at this point. Billy Donovan's another one that I would at least give a call to. And again, I would say, look, we'll give you till April. You got plenty of time to figure this thing out. But if something happens, would you at least listen? I think Billy Donovan would be insane not to listen. What a segment. That is an all-timer. If that is not the most viewed clip on YouTube in the history of the Aaron Torres pod, I am going to be pissed. But listen, I'll just wrap by saying this. I just said it 3 or 4 times, but I want to reiterate. I don't think anyone other than John Calipari is going to be the head coach of Kentucky next year. But as I said, we live in a world where I think even a week ago, it was at 0%. Don't think it's at 0% anymore.